Yeah, so Josh Kimbrough L here with Nigel Johnson, MBA, fourth fourth generation real estate investor, certified affordable housing provider, et cetera, author, series entrepreneur, philanthropy, philanthropy, et cetera. and yeah, we were talking about first off, we were talking about people's limiting beliefs, right? Where where they can only see themselves as a sole proprietor and at best, really even before that, employee, right? So Myron Golden, he has one of his newer teachings is a is about just get rich first. So his first one that I really resonated with was make money faster, where he explained kind of like the fundamentals of the cash flow quadrant in a new perspective. One of the perspectives that I actually use myself. So it was very serendipitous to see his thought process and how he came to his logic, and it was very similar to my logic. So first off, what he did, instead of thinking of it in a quadrant, he thought of it in like stair step ladders. I do that all the time, and that was from my perspective. It was I derived that from looking at real estate projects and how you go from, phase three all the way back to phase zero, right? And looking at code red, what I call now code white, which is phase zero, code red, phase one, phase two, code yellow, phase three, code green, right? So that's how I like to structure because it's an easy way for me to understand it. But a lot of people we were talking about don't have that dual perspective. They don't know how to work on their business as opposed to in their business, right? So, one of the things that we were talking about was, in addition to that, in framing around how to essentially acquire cash flow and assets, I was thinking about the limiting beliefs that I used to have, right? So I remember when I closed one of my first $20,000 deal, right? It was where I made 20,000, and it was a real estate project that I helped, raise the capital or like, structure the capital around, right? It was a mixed use, $1 million deal, and my commission was 20,000, right? So I never understood how some of my mentors used to say that your bank account reflects your perception, right? So it was so wild because I remember before that the biggest deal I'd ever done was like where I get commission of 5,000, right? And I remember that ever since I made that $5,000, it was easy for me to close a $5,000 deal, right? I'm sure like a lot of people had that perspective.
Absolutely.
And then after I closed at 20,000, it seemed like my whole life up to that point I had only made 20,000, and after that that was like I was like, okay, next 20,000. I was closing $20,000 deals. It was very weird to me. It was very strange, and I was like, why was it so hard that time? But then now the next time after that, like it seems like that was the new benchmark, and I realized that that was the case for the 5,000 too. So I realized, and I had to think. I was like, dude, that really is true. Like once you unlock, it's almost like a video game. Once you unlock that in your mind, then it's there. You
Hmm.
can always checkpoint at that level, which was so crazy to like even think that like people had that type of foresight to where they can see where you're at and then tell you where you're getting that wrong. True from a lot of my mentors, and that's one of the things I realized too, where a lot of these times these mentors and like these ultra high net worth people can see exactly where you're at.
Hmm.
Very scary that they can see exactly where you're at enough to see exactly what you're getting hung up on you know so yeah, so like basically some of the points that we review is with Myron Golden. He had a window philosophy, which essentially is understanding what windows you want to operate from, right? So you have on the basic level, you have the poor window, which poor people by their views and beliefs, very similar to what Robert Kiyosaki used to say, right? Poor people have some of the, you hear them say, "Oh, I want to get a good, secure job," or they're saying everything as a construct of bills. Like, hey, how do you like your job? Well, I got to pay the bills.
Hmm.
So that's how you can identify somebody who is employee minded or poor people minded, as what Myron Golden says. Next level is the middle class, or was seemingly the middle class. Now I would argue that that's like middle class is being evaporated, but you can understand them by their views and opinions, by how they say, you know, oh, I want to fix my credit, I want to get good credit, and I want to keep my credit good so I can afford a dream vacation, so they can, you know, essentially let the credit pay for their lifestyle, right? And then finally, the rich category is like where people are known for essentially acquiring cash flowing assets. You know, they're letting that window pay for, and you know, the subsequent thing, that window can pay for your bills, but it also can pay for your lifestyle. And inversely, it can pay for your lifestyle, and also it can pay for your bills. So, yeah,
Man. So I'm glad you was able to like cover that. And it just reminds me of some things that I experienced earlier in my career, where I would say that I had a real good view of where I wanted to go in my life way in the beginning. Like I could see it even before I could see it. I was getting pulled in that direction, right? It was like I had already identified the North Star. Even if my eyes were closed, I could find it, and I got pulled to it. And I was, it just it pulled me there, and I knew what I wanted for my life. And the challenge was that the other people, my so-called support system, right? They couldn't see those things, and they didn't know how to help propel me towards it. In fact, they tried to give me a dose of reality that no, life is supposed to look like this, not what you're dreaming, not what you're envisioning. I already knew that I was going to put forth the effort to end up with a portfolio of rental properties. I knew this from the beginning. I mean, as a child, I would go to my grandma's house and see some of her other houses and different types of things. So I knew that that was possible. Kind of like you with your $20,000. Once that become possible, it's like, okay, that's the new normal. So my new normal was owning a real estate portfolio, and that was my normal at 12 years old, right? So when I'm in high school and I'm sitting at the lunch table, I'm talking to my friends and I'm like, hey, why don't you start a roofing company, and you start a carpentry company, and you start a plumbing company, you start an electrical company, and man, we could take over the world. And they all look at me like I'm crazy. Like, no, I want to do what I want to do. I'm like, okay, well, I'm still going in this direction. Regardless of where you're going, I'm headed this direction and I'm gonna figure this out. And once I got of age where I was able to start acquiring properties, um, and a lot of the people around me, they didn't see the vision. And not only did they not see it, when they heard it, it it kind of inspired them to somewhat sabotage things a little bit, want to pull me off schedule or pull me off my focus or distract me or detour me or try to negotiate to get me to choose a more normal life. And I would say that not all of these people had bad intentions. You know, some of them genuinely thought that what they were saying was what was best, right? And years later, I look back and I see that those proved to be often my biggest obstacles, right? Because they can plant seeds of doubt within you because they have proximity to you. They have access to you. These are the people that you lean on in your worst days. When it storms outside, or when you lost this deal, or when, bad things happen, these are the people you turn to. And when things are back up, they want to remind you of those bad days. Well, it can, and as entrepreneurs, we have to find that North Star. We have to find our purpose. We have to find our direction. And we have to stick to it. We have to find the faith within ourselves to know that that eventual future is really ours and is predestined for us to achieve it. But it's a fragile path because no one's going to make you walk it, right? It's a lot of people that can detour you from it. And then you'll sit back and end up with a life full of regrets. And that's what we don't want, right? So it's a big thing. You mentioned some things you learned from your mentors over the years, and you reminded me of one big lesson my mentor and one of my coaches said early on. And it was that basically is two things that come to mind. The first one, my main mentor, he said, you can change your paradigm by just making a choice. You can just choose to be different. And he stood there in front of me and he literally jumped. He jumped up and landed down. This is an older man, but he jumped right and landed. He said, you can literally switch paradigms that simple. Just jump. Boom. Now all of a sudden it's different. Because he said, and he articulated it by saying something like so many universes overlapping one another. And whatever one you happen to be in, right? Maybe that's has you heading in a certain direction, or your life looks a certain kind of way, or all these types of things. Well, you can change just like as easily as you can change channels on the television. You can change that universe that you choose to occupy. You could change the direction that you're headed, right? But most of us don't realize how much power that we actually have in determining what outcomes that we experience.
Wow. When would you say that was where you got that advice, man? That's some deep quantum physics, bro, that like a lot of people still are just now learning, if not haven't even never heard that before.
It was about 2005.
Wow, bro. Wow. That was probably around the time where I was getting mentored, man. I was 21 and my mentor was 44. And he put me on quantum physics, and that profoundly changed my life. So yeah, man, no wonder. No wonder, man. A lot of people are not like they're not privy to Bob Proctor, Napoleon Hill, you know. They're not privy to quantum physics,
Hmm.
right? So I heard even one of the most kooky guys, like he was talking about out of body experiences, and he's like a thought leader. I'm not going to mention his name in the out of body experiences space. And they said, so like, how do you know this stuff is, possible? Like, how do you, they asked him the question. I thought he was about to nail it. Right. And he went on and said some other secondary response, which was okay response. But people who really know, he should have right off tops when he said this, like how can we do this? The question was, how could we as human beings, and why as human beings do you think we're able to do these things, these extra potentials? How can we change our paradigm? And to me, the answer is very simple. To me, is understanding quantum physics. And at the core of quantum physics, we're energy beings, right?
Hmm.
That's what the core of quantum physics tells us, is that we're energy beings. Like all these things are possible, knowing that we're not bound to our physical structure. We're literally energy being first. So I think that's what a lot of people don't understand about themselves, is that you are your consciousness, you're your mind, you're your soul, you're those things that are not limiting to your physical characteristics. Therefore, you're not limited to your physical reality.
Man, it was I forget where I got this from, but it was somebody said something like, I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me. And I think when I heard that, something shifted in my mind. I don't know what age I had or anything, but that felt right.
Mhm.
That felt like source. That felt like truth. That felt like the proper starting point, right? And many of us, we start from a place of these givens, right? Oh, well, I'm from here, so my options are these, or I went to this school, so my options are that, or my friends have only accomplished this, or my parents have only accomplished that, or I've only seen certain things, so that's all I'm capable of too.
Facts. Man, that's huge. Like those givens are things that you don't even realize that you're preferenced as,
Mhm.
like you're preset as. Like you think that you're judging things from a clean, clear lens. And in fact, you've created a box full of givens for yourself that essentially is your own prison, and you not even realize that you're a slave to those things. So even Myron Golden talked about that briefly too. So it's
Mhm.
it's a lot of truths that can be described from this higher level of like, um I would say, mind estate, right? So that's actually what my book is on, is called The Mind Estate, which talks about your first estate being your mind,
Mhm.
you know? And again, to the untrained eye, like you can easily look past that, right? When you hear so many thought leaders though say, hey, your mindset is the most important thing, your attitude affects your latitude, right? People they just look past those things. But when I really profoundly shifted my mind, realized that was the first estate. That's your first gift, 100 trillion dollar piece of technology in your brain, right? That we still can't even understand, right? And that's your first asset that you need to work on.
Man, that's real. And I think that that's so powerful because if your mind itself can be adjusted to become more fertile soil, then you can be receptive to the types of outcomes that you are hoping for and praying for in your life, right? Um, my coach also talked about the squid eye, and I've talked about this on a couple calls before. But and I think an example of that is when you got your first $5,000 deal, and then you started seeing them everywhere. You got your first $20,000 commission check, and then you started seeing those deals everywhere. And the same thing in my world, where I would see deals and see ways through or ways to make things profitable that many other investors have passed on. you know, and a lot of it is because I committed to who I want to be and who I don't want to be, right? And I found comfort in truth, right? I found comfort in my role, my identity, and my purpose, right? So when I'm looking for solutions, I don't have the blinders on of starting from a place of how profitable is this going to be for me? How much is this going to pay me? I start from a place of who is this going to help? What difference is this going to make? And the implied assumption is that my part's going to be taken care of anyway, right? But that's not a comfortable position for most people. Most people try to start there, and that creates the prison or that creates the blinders or the limiting beliefs that minimize the potential outcomes that you can experience or that you can create. So I mentioned earlier was another one of my coaches way early in my career that really shook my world up, and it was just a simple thing they said. And they said, because I was early on, I was close to quitting my corporate job, which also was 2005. That's how I remember that other conversation. And I was studying under this couple that was teaching a particular technique on real estate, and one phrase they said repeatedly was, "If you're broke, go buy a house." And to a person that's like new or, you know, just getting in the business or just getting into entrepreneurship, it shakes your world up and shifts your paradigm to hear something like that. What do you mean if I'm broke, go buy? How am I going to buy a house if I'm broke? It's by creating value, right? It's by it's by creating a holistic solution, right? Most people in our world are looking for transactions, but once you've matured in business and in life and in purpose, right? Then what you start pursuing is transformation. See, that's much bigger. That's much more impactful. That involves so many other stakeholders in life itself. You'll see the ripples, like you throw a little pebble in the ocean or something like those ripples go out in so many directions all at once. You never know how far they may travel. Well, it's the same thing with the decisions and indecisions that you make in your life and in your business, right? So that's why it's so important to stay on point, stay on focus, and again, find that North Star. Find it early. And even if you can't articulate or justify why this is the right path, right? Sometimes if you know, you just know. And the people that was the biggest detractors early on, or telling you why it won't work, or all these other things that what you might interpret as obstacles that are really like your sparring partners to help you to overcome when you do run into the real obstacles out in the world, right?
Facts, facts.
Those become your biggest fans and your biggest believers once you've achieved it. Those end up being the people who you've inspired the most. Those be the people that have the overflow of your greatness and your good intention pouring onto them and impacting their lives too. So don't hold it against them either, you know, because remember, they're coming from a good place too. Oftentimes they're led by fear, but I suggest for you to be led by purpose.
Bingo, bingo. There it is. Yeah, that's really the underlying principle of what I call the conscious economy, right? Which is one with collective mind state, right? Was feeling that deep down, that what I call the CI, which is the conscious intention, which fuels manifestation, right? Is purpose. Purpose is driving that. So, as Steve Jobs says, the reason why we get a lesser economy is because you get a lesser product. People are doing a lesser job, and the reason why people are doing a lesser job is because they're not passionate, right? They don't have any purpose. Well, there it is.
So you want to close it on that?
Well, in summation, really to close this out, we talked about a lot of concepts. We talked about limiting beliefs. We talked about objections, and sometimes the people closest to you mean you well, but they're led by a fear-based dichotomy. We've talked about limiting to your own perception of reality and how we can quantum leap or essentially understand the truth of reality is that we're not fixated to reality. So we talked about mind state and understanding how your purpose affects your trajectory. So I think that to sum all those things up, I would say, understanding true purpose will help lead your direction, and that will basically, when you get passionate and you get determined, like what Napoleon Hill said after he analyzed 2,000 plus top level CEOs, he realized the number one factor or that secret was that desire, so that hunger. And that's something that Myron Golden actually said in his talk too. He said that, I assume that's a gift from the creator himself, because it's something that sparks you to take action, and that desire just to shift your paradigm is something that we can't look past. That's one of the first intangible gifts. So
All right. I think that brings us to a close. It's another one. We'll see you on the next one.
shalom.